Your Grace no longer has a wife, only a prisoner, awaiting inquiry. Lady Celeste Marlowe spoke the words before the assembled tenants, but Adrian Wycliffe, Duke of Ravensmere, allowed them to stand. Silence settled across the great hall. Nearly 200 tenants crowded beneath the carved oak gallery, their damp coats carrying the smell of rain, wool, and river mud. At the far end of the chamber, 6 black ribbons had been tied around the estate banner, one for each labourer killed when the retaining wall at Blackwater Canal collapsed. Marianne stood alone before the trustees' table. Adrian occupied the ducal chair beneath his late brother's portrait. His dark blue coat was immaculate, his expression harder than the stone walls surrounding him. Celeste sat openly at his right hand, wearing mourning grey despite having no relation to the dead men. "Is that your judgment?" Marianne asked. Her husband did not look at Celeste. "The evidence leaves me little choice. You were offered another choice 20 minutes ago. Thomas Fenwick is waiting outside this hall. He supervised the repairs and asked to testify. Fenwick served your father. He has served Ravensmere for 11 years, and his loyalty has now produced 6 graves." A murmur passed through the tenants. Marianne recognized the voices of men whose cottages she had saved from the spring floods, and women whose children attended the school she had reopened. None met her eyes. Adrian lifted the document lying before him. "This order bears your initials and instructs the workmen to remove the eastern braces before the mortar had cured. My initials can be copied, and the instructions use the drainage calculations found in your survey room. Then whoever entered that room knew precisely what to steal." Celeste leaned forward. "Must every fact become another accusation against the household, Your Grace?" Marianne turned toward her. "Only the facts you are afraid to examine." A brief crack appeared in Celeste's composure. It vanished behind a sorrowful lowering of her lashes. Adrian rose.
"Enough! From this hour, you are stripped of all household and estate authority. You will surrender the keys to the accounts office, the canal works, and the tenant treasury. Until the county inquiry is concluded, you will reside at Northmere House under supervision."
Northmere stood 30 miles from the nearest market town. Its roof leaked, its road flooded every winter, and no carriage could cross the surrounding marsh after heavy rain. Adrian was not sending her into formal custody. He was placing her somewhere the truth could not reach her. Marianne looked toward the 6 labourers' families. Mrs. Harrow clutched 2 small boys against her skirts. The widow's pension fund contained enough to support every household through the coming year, but only if the quarterly drafts were issued before Friday. "And the pensions?" Marianne asked. "Lady Celeste will assume responsibility for them." Celeste extended one gloved hand. "The keys, if you please." Marianne unfastened the silver ring from her waist. She placed each key upon the table separately, forcing Celeste to receive them beneath the gaze of the entire hall. The canal office. Clink. The household ledgers. Clink. The tenant treasury. The final key struck the wood and spun between them. Then Marianne removed the brass survey compass, hanging from a narrow chain at her belt. Adrian's gaze sharpened. "That also belongs to Ravensmere. It belonged to my uncle before Ravensmere employed him." Adrian held out his hand. Marianne placed the compass beside the alleged order. Its lid had been dented during the flood of 1812, when she had spent 14 hours directing workers along the southern embankment. Adrian had once praised her courage that night. Now his face showed no memory of it. The compass needle trembled. Instead of settling north, it swung toward the red wax seal at the bottom of the document. Marianne stilled. She rotated the compass. The needle followed the seal. There was iron beneath, or within the wax. Adrian's authentic matrix was engraved silver. It could leave no iron residue. Someone had produced the impression with a counterfeit steel die, and in their haste, they had failed to brush away the filings before pressing it into the softened wax. "Adrian," she said quietly. Bring the seal closer to the compass. His eyes moved from the needle to her face. For one suspended moment, doubt disturbed his certainty. Celeste covered the document with her hand. A parlor instrument proves nothing, she said. Then let Fenwick enter, Marianne replied. Let him examine the order. Let any metalworker in Ravensmere test that wax. The hall doors opened before Adrian could answer. A young messenger staggered inside, soaked to the skin and breathing violently. Your Grace, the lower reservoir is failing. Adrian came around the table. Was another wall breached? No, Your Grace. The gates remain closed, but the level has fallen 3 feet since noon. Water is moving against the ordinary current into the abandoned western channel. Marianne felt the blood drain from her face. That channel had been sealed 16 years ago. It did not appear on the current estate maps, and opening it required access to a buried spillway beneath Crown Wood. Only 3 complete surveys showed its location. One was locked in Marianne's office. One belonged to Adrian. The third had disappeared with Nathaniel Wycliffe on the night he died. Celeste gathered the disputed order, while Tobias Crane, the estate steward, quietly pocketed the treasury key. At last, Marianne understood. The forged document was not intended merely to disgrace her. The 6 deaths, the public accusation, and Adrian's refusal to hear Fenwick had cleared every obstacle from the canal works at once. Her humiliation was not the conclusion of the scheme. It was the key that had opened it. Adrian reached for the disputed order, but Celeste held it just beyond his fingers. The reservoir must come first, she said. Mr. Crane should take men to the western channel immediately. No, Marianne said. Every face in the hall turned toward her. She stepped between Tobias Crane and the treasury key he had slipped into his pocket. If the lower reservoir has fallen 3 feet without a visible breach, someone has opened the buried culvert beneath Crown Wood. Sending men along the western bank will place them directly beneath the overflow slope. Crane's narrow mouth tightened. Your Grace has relieved you of authority. He has not altered the movement of water. Marianne turned to the messenger. Was the current cloudy? The boy nodded. Brown at first, Your Grace, Your Ladyship. Then nearly black. Any branches or leaves? No, ma'am. Pieces of white stone. Chalk, Marianne said. Her uncle had taught her to read waterways before she was old enough to attend a London season. Edmund Ashcombe had designed locks and spillways from Kent to Yorkshire, taking his orphaned niece with him after her mother's death. While other girls learned ornamental embroidery, Marianne learned that clay made water red, peat made it black, and crushed chalk revealed a channel cut beneath limestone. The buried culvert has been cleared from below, she continued. Someone is drawing water through the old chalk tunnel toward the western valley. Adrian looked toward the rain beating against the tall windows. What lies in that valley? Crown Wood, 12 tenant farms, and the abandoned Whitcomb quarry. Crane gave a dry laugh. An abandoned hole in the earth hardly merits panic. It merits interest when Blackwater water is being diverted into it 12 days before a parliamentary inspection. Marianne faced Adrian. If the inspectors find the navigation depth below its statutory mark, Ravensmere will lose its canal charter. Every merchant using our wharves may redirect his cargo to Belchester. The Duke's expression altered. Canal tolls paid his creditors, maintained the tenants' roads, and supplied nearly half the estate's annual income. Without them, Ravensmere would not merely suffer, it would default. Celeste rose with elegant urgency. All the more reason to remove Lady Marianne before she causes further damage. I have been warning the trustees about unexplained water loss for 7 weeks, Marianne said. The reports are in the blue survey ledger. Adrian looked at Crane. Did you receive those reports?
I received several speculative memoranda. None suggested an immediate danger. The first included measurements from 14-gauge posts. The second identified unauthorized night traffic near Crown Wood. The third requested guards for the western spillway.
Marianne watched Crane's fingers close around the key inside his pocket. All three bear your counter-signature. A stir moved through the tenants. Adrian's attention shifted sharply toward his steward. Crane bowed. I acknowledge their arrival, Your Grace. I did not certify their conclusions, because you never visited the gauges, Marianne said. I did. She crossed to the long side table where the estate maps had been displayed for the inquiry. Celeste tried to intercept her, but Marianne placed one hand upon the largest survey. Touch me, Lady Celeste, and every person in this hall will see how eagerly you silence a woman who has not yet been convicted. Celeste stopped. It was Marianne's first boundary, spoken without husband, title, or household keys to enforce it. Yet the space around her widened. She unrolled the map and pressed 4 silver table weights onto its corners. In 1809, Blackwater carried enough water to operate 3 locks during the driest month of summer. Last week, after continuous rain, the eastern gauge stood 9 inches lower than it did in that drought. Water cannot vanish. It can only be stored, diverted, or falsely measured. You maintain these records? Asked Reverend Samuel Hart, the parish rector and one of the trustees. Unlike the others, he had not avoided her eyes since the previous surveyor died. And the result? Canal revenue increased by 18% in 2 years. Spring flooding fell by nearly half. The money saved established the widow's pension fund, now being taken from me. Mrs. Harrow began to weep soundlessly. Marianne looked at her and made the decision before caution could restrain her. The pension drafts have already been prepared. Reverend Hart witnessed my signature yesterday. They are lawful obligations of the trust, not favors to be revoked by a new household appointment. Celeste's face cooled. You presume too much. No, I preserved too much to watch you steal it in an afternoon. Adrian descended the dais. Marianne, if you know how to stop the drainage, tell me. Order Crane to surrender the Western Maintenance Register. Send Fenwick, not Crane, to close the lower sluice, then place the forged order in Reverend Hart's custody until it can be examined. His jaw hardened at the conditions. You are in no position to command me. Then I am in no position to rescue you. The words landed between them, with the finality of a closing door. Marianne took back her compass, leaving the keys and the estate map behind. A constable moved to escort her away, but Reverend Hart stepped beside her. I shall accompany Her Grace to Northmere and ensure the pension drafts are delivered, he announced. Adrian could refuse his wife. Refusing a clergyman before 200 tenants would carry a different cost. He gave a stiff nod. As Marianne approached the doors, Thomas Fenwick was finally admitted. The aging foreman's left arm rested in a sling, and dried blood marked his temple. He saw the forged order in Celeste's hand and stopped. That is not the instruction we received, he said. Adrian turned. What did you receive? Fenwick's gaze found Marianne. An order bearing His Grace's private signature, not hers. Adrian's face became utterly still. You are certain it bore my signature? I watched Mr. Crane break the seal, Fenwick replied. The order instructed us to remove the eastern braces and deepen the foundation trench before sunset. I objected, but Mr. Crane said delay would be treated as insubordination. Crane stepped forward. The man was struck during the collapse. His memory is plainly impaired. My head was injured, not my eyes. Fenwick tried to reach inside his coat, but the constable seized his wrist. Marianne moved instinctively toward him. Release him. He may be carrying a weapon, Celeste said. He is carrying his workbook. Marianne recognized the cracked leather cover protruding beneath his coat. Adrian gestured, and the constable let go. Fenwick removed the little book with his uninjured hand. Several pages were stained with canal water and blood. I copied the order before returning it, as regulations require. Crane's confidence faltered. A laborer's copy proves nothing. He could have written it afterward. Then compare the wording, Marianne said. Fenwick opened the book on the trustee's table. His copy ordered the removal of the eastern braces and excavation beneath the retaining wall. The document attributed to Marianne merely ordered the braces inspected and replaced where necessary. Both were dangerous under the circumstances, but they were not the same instruction. Someone produced two orders, Reverend Hart said, one to cause the collapse and another to accuse Her Grace after it occurred. Adrian examined the handwriting. "This is not my signature, nor is that mine," Marianne answered. "Yet you were prepared to confine me without hearing the one man who saw both documents." A flush rose along Adrian's cheekbones. For an instant, she thought he might acknowledge the choice he had made. Instead, he closed Fenwick's book. "The copies could have come from the same conspirator. Your innocence is not established merely because my name was also forged." He had seen the contradiction and chosen the explanation that preserved his anger. Marianne felt something inside her grow quiet. "Then preserve both documents and question everyone who handled them." "I shall conduct the inquiry," Celeste announced. Adrian turned toward her. "You have no experience with canal works." "No, but I understand households and disloyal servants. Whoever did this required access to Marianne's rooms, your correspondence, and the estate seal." "Give me authority over the staff, and I will discover who assisted her." Marianne understood Celeste's intention immediately. Control of the servants would allow her to dismiss witnesses, search private rooms, and determine which records survived. "You would let one suspect investigate another." "Lady Celeste is not a suspect," Adrian said. "She was present in London when the first drainage irregularities were recorded. She returned to Ravensmere 3 days before the wall collapsed." Celeste's smile remained perfectly composed. "At His Grace's invitation." Adrian hesitated, but only briefly. "Lady Celeste will supervise the household inquiry. Crane will retain authority over the canal until I appoint a replacement. Then Fenwick will not survive the week," Marianne said. "Take care." Adrian's warning was quiet. "I am taking care. You are placing him beneath the authority of the man he has contradicted." Fenwick closed his book. "I will not withdraw my statement." Celeste studied him as if measuring a piece of fabric for cutting. Marianne turned to Reverend Hart. "Mr. Fenwick travels with us." "He remains an employee of Ravensmere," Crane objected. "And a witness in an inquiry involving 6 deaths," Hart replied. "Until a magistrate examines him, his safety concerns the parish." The rector's intervention gave Adrian a respectable path away from another public refusal. "Very well," he said. "Fenwick may stay at Northmere under Hart's supervision." Marianne had lost her keys and position, but she had secured the first living witness beyond Crane's control. It was a small victory, fragile enough to break beneath a single official order, yet Celeste's eyes revealed that she understood its importance. A groom brought Marianne's traveling cloak. As she fastened it, Fenwick pressed something cold into her palm. It was an ordinary brass tally, no larger than a shilling, its edge notched twice, and its face stamped with a small heron. "Found it beneath the collapsed braces," he whispered. "Not one of ours." Marianne closed her fingers around it before Crane could see. She had encountered similar tallies at commercial wharves, where they identified wagons permitted to collect cargo without paying at each gate. The heron belonged to no Ravensmere tenant or canal company she knew. Outside, rain hammered the waiting carriage. Reverend Hart helped Fenwick inside while Marianne paused beside the wheel. Across the courtyard, Crane spoke urgently to Celeste beneath the portico. Celeste handed him the ring of estate keys, including the one to Marianne's survey office. Adrian watched the exchange from the hall doors. His brow contracted, as though he recognized that Celeste was exercising authority before he had issued written terms, but he said nothing. Marianne climbed into the carriage. As it rolled away, she looked back through the rain-streaked glass and saw Celeste unlock the survey wing herself. Tobias Crane followed, carrying an empty document case. Celeste had entered Ravensmere, intending to replace a wife. She now understood that Marianne's maps, Fenwick's testimony, and the unnoticed brass tally could expose something far more dangerous. Before the carriage passed through the gates, Celeste looked directly toward it and drew one finger slowly across her throat. Marianne did not react to Celeste's gesture. She lowered the carriage blind and opened her hand, revealing the brass tally Fenwick had given her. Reverend Hart leaned closer while the foreman braced his injured arm against the jolting carriage wall. "A heron," the rector murmured. "Does it identify a company?" "Not one registered on the Blackwater Canal." Marianne turned the tally toward the grey light. 2 fresh notches had been cut into its edge, but beneath them she found a shallow groove worn smooth by repeated use. "This is not new. Someone has been moving wagons through private gates for months." Fenwick frowned. "I saw a wagon marked with a white bird near the western embankment 3 nights before the collapse. Crane claimed it carried lime for the repairs. Did you inspect it?" "He would not permit me." The carriage suddenly lurched to a halt. Outside, the coachman shouted as frightened horses stamped in the mud. Marianne opened the door. The road ahead had disappeared beneath a widening sheet of water. It poured from the direction of Crown Wood, carrying reeds, broken fencing, and pale fragments of chalk. "The old culvert has reached the marsh road," she said. Northmere House stood beyond the flooded ground, but continuing toward it would trap them between the marsh and the rising western channel. Marianne climbed down before the coachman could protest. She tested the current with a fallen branch, then studied the slope, hedgerows, and line of alder trees bordering the road. Her uncle's original survey returned to her with painful clarity. A forgotten drainage ditch ran behind the abandoned chapel 1/2 mile east. If reopened, it could divert the first surge away from the tenant farms and return part of the flow to Blackwater Brook. "Turn the carriage toward Whitcomb Village," she ordered. "We need every man with a shovel, mattock, or farm spade." "His Grace ordered us to Northmere," the constable said. "Then you may obey him alone and drown with perfect discipline." Marianne took the reins from the startled coachman and led the horses toward higher ground. By the time they reached Whitcomb, the chapel bell was already ringing an alarm. Water had entered 2 cottages, and terrified families were carrying bedding and grain sacks uphill. Marianne found the village bailiff, Josiah Reed, directing men without any knowledge of where to dig. She climbed onto a stone trough and drew the old drainage route in mud across its flat rim. "Cut here, behind the chapel wall, then follow the line of willows south. Do not deepen the center until both banks are braced. If the ditch collapses while men are inside it, we shall lose them." Reed studied her improvised map. "Mr. Crane ordered every available laborer to the quarry road. Then Mr. Crane has sent them toward the water instead of across it." A distant roar rolled over the fields. Marianne saw fear pass through the villagers. "You may trust the steward who is not here," she said, "or the woman standing in the flood beside you." Reed seized a spade. "Behind the chapel," the villagers followed. Marianne worked among them, her traveling dress soaked to the knees, measuring the fall of the ground with her compass and a length of knotted cord. Fenwick insisted on helping despite his injured arm. When a section of bank gave way beneath him, Marianne caught his coat and dragged him backward, taking the force of the collapse against her own shoulder. Pain shot down her arm, but she did not release him until 2 men pulled them both clear. "You should have let me fall," Fenwick gasped. "You are the only witness who saw the first order," she replied. "Until you speak before a magistrate, your life is no longer yours to risk." Reverend Hart heard the words. So did Josiah Reed, who silently removed the heron tally from the mud where Marianne had dropped it and returned it to her palm. The ordinary act established something more valuable than gratitude, a witness who had seen the object in her possession before anyone could accuse her of manufacturing it. At dusk, the workers broke through the final wall of packed silt. Water rushed into the reopened ditch, surged beneath the chapel bridge, and turned south toward Blackwater Brook. A cheer rose from the exhausted villagers as the level around the cottages began to fall. Marianne allowed herself one breath of relief. Then riders appeared on the ridge. Tobias Crane arrived with 6 estate guards, and Lady Celeste beside him, in a closed carriage. Crane surveyed the saved cottages before addressing the villagers. His Grace anticipated the danger and ordered this channel reopened, he announced. Ravensmere is fortunate that Lady Celeste recovered the late Lord Nathaniel's drainage notes in time. Marianne stared at him. Nathaniel had never prepared those notes. The route had been drawn by Marianne and her uncle 11 years earlier. Celeste emerged holding a familiar blue ledger against her cloak, the survey book taken from Marianne's locked office. "You stole my work," Marianne said. "Ravensmere owns every record produced in its service," Celeste replied. "And because your reckless diversion has damaged the Whitcomb Road, the repair cost will be charged against the widow's fund." Mrs. Harrow, who had followed the laborers from the hall, made a broken sound. Marianne stepped between her and Crane. "Touch 1 penny of that fund, and I will petition the Court of Chancery through its trustees." "With what money?" Celeste asked softly. "Your allowance has been suspended, your room sealed, and your reputation destroyed. By tomorrow, every newspaper in the county will call you a murderer." Marianne's injured shoulder throbbed, but she kept her voice level. "Then they will also print the names of the men who refused to inspect a counterfeit seal." Celeste's eyes narrowed. Crane ordered the constable to take Fenwick into estate custody, claiming the foreman had violated his employment. Marianne placed herself before him. "He remains under Reverend Hart's protection. Stand aside." "No." Crane raised his hand toward a guard, but hoofbeats sounded from the northern road. Adrian rode into the village with mud splashed to his collar and the original ducal seal case strapped across his chest. His gaze moved from the reopened channel to Marianne's injured arm, then to the blue ledger in Celeste's hands. Reverend Hart approached him, carrying Fenwick's copied order, the forged accusation, and a sealed statement witnessed by every man who had reopened the ditch. "Your Grace," the rector said, "you wished for proof. Here is your opportunity to examine it before choosing whom to believe again." Adrian dismounted without answering Reverend Hart and carried the seal case into the abandoned chapel, where candles were lit across the cracked altar. Marianne, Fenwick, Celeste, Crane, and 3 trustees followed him inside, while the villagers remained outside beneath the dripping eaves. Adrian unlocked the case and removed the silver ducal matrix. Reverend Hart placed the 2 disputed orders beside it. Marianne opened her compass near the wax on the accusation, and the needle turned immediately. When Adrian pressed his authentic seal into fresh wax, the needle did not move. "The accusation was sealed with steel," Marianne said. "Someone copied your matrix." Adrian examined Fenwick's transcription next. The foreman's account contained details absent from the order attributed to Marianne. The eastern braces were to be removed at 4 o'clock, the trench deepened by 18 inches, and the laborers kept at the wall despite rising water. "Who delivered these instructions?" Adrian asked. "Mr. Crane," Fenwick replied. "On whose authority?" "He said yours." Crane's expression remained controlled. "I delivered the paper entrusted to me. I did not compose it." "By whom was it entrusted?" "A messenger, wearing Lady Marianne's household colors." Marianne stared at him. "My servants do not wear private livery. They did before your marriage," Celeste said. "Several Ashcombe retainers still live near the southern boundary. Any one of them could have carried the order." She produced the blue survey ledger and opened it to a page showing the buried western culvert. Only Marianne knew enough to divert the reservoir without raising the visible gates. Perhaps she intended to damage the canal, blame the steward, and force His Grace to restore her authority.
"Then why would I reopen the chapel ditch and prevent the flood from destroying Whitcomb?" Marianne demanded.
"Because your first attempt became too dangerous to control."
Adrian looked at the cottages below. The water was retreating exactly along the channel Marianne had drawn.
He had seen her work through cold and pain to save people who had stood silent during her humiliation. The knowledge troubled him, But Celeste understood how to turn that discomfort back towards suspicion. Nathaniel also trusted an Ashcombe promise, she said softly. Adrian's hand closed around the edge of the altar. His brother's death had occurred 8 years earlier, when a bridge collapsed beneath his carriage after an Ashcombe engineer declared it safe. Marianne's father had denied issuing the inspection certificate, but the document carried his seal. Adrian had built his hatred upon that paper, and then married Marianne, when a settlement between their families became the only way to prevent years of litigation over Blackwater. "This is not about Nathaniel," Marianne said. "It has always been about Nathaniel." Adrian's voice sharpened. Adrian accepted the rector's evidence, but did not open Fenwick's statement. "First, I will hear why my orders were disobeyed." His gaze settled upon Marianne, then dropped to the mud darkening her dress and the arm she held rigidly against her side. Concern flickered across his face, but pride extinguished it before it could become action. "The road was already under water," she said. "Had we continued to Northmere, the carriage would have been trapped. Reopening this ditch saved Whitcomb. Lady Celeste informed me that Nathaniel designed the channel." She lied. Marianne pointed toward the blue ledger in Celeste's hands. "That book contains my uncle's survey and my calculations. Ask her to show you the page bearing Nathaniel's signature." Celeste offered Adrian the ledger without hesitation. The relevant leaves were removed from the archive before I recovered it. Marianne must have destroyed them when she realized they contradicted her account. "How convenient," Marianne said. Adrian opened the ducal seal case, strapped across his chest. The fitted velvet compartment inside was empty. He stared at it, and for the first time genuine alarm broke through his composure. "Where is the matrix?" Crane bowed. "Your Grace placed it in the estate strongbox after signing the winter contracts. Only Adrian and you knew the strongbox combination," Marianne said. "And you had access to his private correspondence." Crane's expression hardened. "A wife requires no combination to enter her husband's rooms." Adrian looked at Marianne. She saw the old accusation forming before he spoke. The suspicion rooted in Nathaniel's death, fed for 3 years because it gave his grief a human target. "You entered my study on the morning after the collapse," he said, "to collect the rainfall register. I told you why. No servant witnessed you take it. Because you dismissed my secretary 2 months ago at Celeste's request." His jaw tightened. She stepped closer despite the guards. "Open Fenwick's statement. Compare the 2 orders. Send a rider for a silversmith to examine the iron filings in the wax. Ask Josiah Reed, who directed the work here. You have evidence before you, and the means to test it. If you refuse now, no one else will have made this choice for you." Rain struck the chapel roof in a relentless drumming. Adrian looked at Fenwick's sealed statement, then at Celeste. Celeste did not plead. She merely lowered her eyes toward Nathaniel's mourning ring on Adrian's hand. "It was enough. The inquiry can wait until the canal is secured," he said. Marianne felt the last fragile hope in her marriage give way. "And who will secure it?" Crane produced a folded contract from inside his coat. "The Heron Navigation Company has barges, engineers, and 80 laborers stationed at Belchester. They can restore the reservoir depth before the parliamentary inspection, provided your Grace grants them temporary authority over the Western Channel and canal tolls." Marianne's fingers closed around the brass tally hidden in her palm. The stamped heron suddenly had a name. "This company already has wagons inside Ravensmere," she said. "Fenwick saw them before the collapse." Crane did not glance at her. "We anticipated that emergency supplies might be required." Before there was an emergency, Adrian took the contract. Marianne moved nearer and saw several ribbons attached to the final page. "What security do they demand?" "Only the Whitcomb quarry and adjoining woodland, if Ravensmere fails to repay the restoration costs within 90 days, Crane replied. "Worthless ground in exchange for preserving the canal charter." "The quarry is not worthless." Marianne remembered the chalk fragments in the diverted water and her uncle's warning that the western excavation had been abandoned before a complete mineral survey. "You do not know what lies beneath it," Celeste gave a soft, weary sigh. Now she would have us believe an exhausted quarry is a treasure merely because it supports her latest conspiracy. Give me 1 day, Marianne said. Let me examine the original boring records and trace the heron tally. If I am wrong, I will go to Northmere without another objection. Adrian's hand paused above the contract. It was the moment she had offered him in the hall, now stripped of witnesses who might mistake hesitation for weakness. He could delay, he could investigate, he could protect his tenants without trusting his wife. Instead, he looked at the 6 guards, the flooded road, and the woman whose family name still summoned the image of his brother's broken body. He took Crane's pen. Ravensmere cannot afford a day, Adrian signed. Crane pressed his signet beneath the ducal signature, and Celeste witnessed the transfer. With 3 strokes of ink, the Heron Navigation Company gained control of the Western Channel, its toll receipts, and every road leading to Whitcomb Quarry. Fenwick will remain in estate custody until the inquiry, Adrian continued. Marianne will proceed to Northmere tonight. Reverend Hart may visit, but no letters will leave without examination. You are silencing the witness and isolating the accused, Hart said. I am preventing interference. Marianne looked at the man she had married, and finally stopped measuring him against the husband he might have been. You have not prevented the scheme, Adrian. You have signed your name beneath it. Crane ordered the guards forward. Fenwick resisted when they seized him, and one struck his injured shoulder. Marianne stepped between them, taking the second blow across her back. I will go quietly if he travels in the carriage with Reverend Hart. Agreed, Adrian said, but he could not meet her eyes. The guards escorted them toward the waiting carriage. As Marianne climbed inside, the brass tally caught against the torn lining of her glove. One of its 2 notches broke free, revealing that the edge was not solid. A thin strip of rolled paper had been concealed inside a narrow channel, drilled through the brass. She waited until the carriage began moving, before drawing it out with Fenwick's pin. The paper contained 4 abbreviated entries: powder, West Vault, midnight, 12 charges. Marianne looked through the rear window. Beyond Whitcomb, lanterns were already moving toward the abandoned quarry. Adrian had not merely surrendered the canal to his enemies. He had given them legal authority to destroy the last structure holding the reservoir above 3 villages. Adrian accepted the rector's evidence, but did not open Fenwick's statement. First, I will hear why my orders were disobeyed. His gaze settled upon Marianne, then dropped to the mud darkening her dress and the arm she held rigidly against her side. Concern flickered across his face, but pride extinguished it before it could become action. The road was already underwater, she said. Had we continued to Northmere, the carriage would have been trapped. Reopening this ditch saved Whitcomb. Lady Celeste informed me that Nathaniel designed the channel. She lied. Marianne pointed toward the blue ledger in Celeste's hands. That book contains my uncle's survey and my calculations. Ask her to show you the page bearing Nathaniel's signature. Celeste offered Adrian the ledger without hesitation. The relevant leaves were removed from the archive before I recovered it. Marianne must have destroyed them when she realized they contradicted her account. How convenient, Marianne said. Adrian opened the ducal seal case strapped across his chest. The fitted velvet compartment inside was empty. He stared at it, and for the first time genuine alarm broke through his composure. Where is the matrix? Crane bowed. Your Grace placed it in the estate strongbox after signing the winter contracts. Only Adrian and you knew the strongbox combination, Marianne said. And you had access to his private correspondence. Crane's expression hardened. A wife requires no combination to enter her husband's rooms. Adrian looked at Marianne. She saw the old accusation forming before he spoke. The suspicion rooted in Nathaniel's death, fed for 3 years because it gave his grief a human target. You entered my study on the morning after the collapse, he said, to collect the rainfall register. I told you why. No servant witnessed you take it. Because you dismissed my secretary 2 months ago, at Celeste's request. His jaw tightened. She stepped closer, despite the guards. Open Fenwick's statement. Compare the two orders. Send a rider for a silversmith to examine the iron filings in the wax. Ask Josiah Reed, who directed the work here. You have evidence before you and the means to test it. If you refuse now, no one else will have made this choice for you. Rain struck the chapel roof in a relentless drumming. Adrian looked at Fenwick's sealed statement, then at Celeste. Celeste did not plead. She merely lowered her eyes toward Nathaniel's mourning ring on Adrian's hand. It was enough. The inquiry can wait until the canal is secured, he said. Marianne felt the last fragile hope in her marriage give way. And who will secure it? But Crane produced a folded contract from inside his coat. The Heron Navigation Company has barges, engineers, and 80 laborers stationed at Belchester. They can restore the reservoir depth before the parliamentary inspection, provided your grace grants them temporary authority over the western channel and canal tolls. Marianne's fingers closed around the brass tally hidden in her palm. The stamped heron suddenly had a name. This company already has wagons inside Ravensmere, she said. Fenwick saw them before the collapse. Crane did not glance at her. We anticipated that emergency supplies might be required. Before there was an emergency, Adrian took the contract. Marianne moved nearer and saw several ribbons attached to the final page. What security do they demand? Only the Whitcomb quarry and adjoining woodland, if Ravensmere fails to repay the restoration costs within 90 days, Crane replied. Worthless ground in exchange for preserving the canal charter. The quarry is not worthless. Marianne remembered the chalk fragments in the diverted water and her uncle's warning that the western excavation had been abandoned before a complete mineral survey. You do not know what lies beneath it. Celeste gave a soft, weary sigh. Now she would have us believe an exhausted quarry is a treasure, merely because it supports her latest conspiracy. Give me 1 day, Marianne said. Let me examine the original boring records and trace the heron tally. If I am wrong, I will go to Northmere without another objection. Adrian's hand paused above the contract. It was the moment she had offered him in the hall, now stripped of witnesses who might mistake hesitation for weakness. He could delay. He could investigate. He could protect his tenants without trusting his wife. Instead, he looked at the 6 guards, the flooded road, and the woman whose family name still summoned the image of his brother's broken body. He took Crane's pen. Ravensmere cannot afford a day, Adrian signed. Crane pressed his signet beneath the ducal signature, and Celeste witnessed the transfer. With 3 strokes of ink, the Heron Navigation Company gained control of the Western Channel, its toll receipts, and every road leading to Whitcomb Quarry. Fenwick will remain in estate custody until the inquiry, Adrian continued. Marianne will proceed to Northmere tonight. Reverend Hart may visit, but no letters will leave without examination. You are silencing the witness and isolating the accused, Hart said. I am preventing interference. Marianne looked at the man she had married, and finally stopped measuring him against the husband he might have been. You have not prevented the scheme, Adrian. You have signed your name beneath it. Crane ordered the guards forward. Fenwick resisted when they seized him, and one struck his injured shoulder. Marianne stepped between them, taking the second blow across her back. I will go quietly, if he travels in the carriage with Reverend Hart. Agreed, Adrian said, but he could not meet her eyes. The guards escorted them toward the waiting carriage. As Marianne climbed inside, the brass tally caught against the torn lining of her glove. One of its 2 notches broke free, revealing that the edge was not solid. A thin strip of rolled paper had been concealed inside a narrow channel, drilled through the brass. She waited until the carriage began moving, before drawing it out with Fenwick's pin. The paper contained 4 abbreviated entries: powder, West Vault, midnight, 12 charges. Marianne looked through the rear window. Beyond Whitcomb, lanterns were already moving toward the abandoned quarry. Adrian had not merely surrendered the canal to his enemies. He had given them legal authority to destroy the last structure holding the reservoir above 3 villages. Adrian accepted the rector's evidence, but did not open Fenwick's statement. First, I will hear why my orders were disobeyed. His gaze settled upon Marianne, then dropped to the mud darkening her dress and the arm she held rigidly against her side. Concern flickered across his face, but pride extinguished it before it could become action. The road was already under water, she said. Had we continued to Northmere, the carriage would have been trapped. Reopening this ditch saved Whitcomb. Lady Celeste informed me that Nathaniel designed the channel. She lied. Marianne pointed toward the blue ledger in Celeste's hands. That book contains my uncle's survey and my calculations. Ask her to show you the page bearing Nathaniel's signature. Celeste offered Adrian the ledger without hesitation. The relevant leaves were removed from the archive before I recovered it. Marianne must have destroyed them when she realized they contradicted her account. How convenient, Marianne said. Adrian opened the ducal seal case strapped across his chest. The fitted velvet compartment inside was empty. He stared at it, and for the first time genuine alarm broke through his composure. Where is the matrix? Crane bowed. Your Grace placed it in the estate strongbox after signing the winter contracts. Only Adrian and you knew the strongbox combination, Marianne said. And you had access to his private correspondence. Crane's expression hardened. A wife requires no combination to enter her husband's rooms. Adrian looked at Marianne. She saw the old accusation forming before he spoke. The suspicion, rooted in Nathaniel's death, fed for 3 years because it gave his grief a human target. You entered my study on the morning after the collapse, he said, to collect the rainfall register. I told you why. No servant witnessed you take it, because you dismissed my secretary 2 months ago. At Celeste's request, his jaw tightened. She stepped closer despite the guards. Open Fenwick's statement. Compare the 2 orders. Send a rider for a silversmith to examine the iron filings in the wax. Ask Josiah Reed who directed the work here. You have evidence before you and the means to test it. If you refuse now, no one else will have made this choice for you. Rain struck the chapel roof in a relentless drumming. Adrian looked at Fenwick's sealed statement, then at Celeste. Celeste did not plead. She merely lowered her eyes toward Nathaniel's mourning ring on Adrian's hand. It was enough. The inquiry can wait until the canal is secured, he said. Marianne felt the last fragile hope in her marriage give way. And who will secure it? Crane produced a folded contract from inside his coat. The Heron Navigation Company has barges, engineers, and 80 laborers stationed at Belchester. They can restore the reservoir depth before the parliamentary inspection, provided your Grace grants them temporary authority over the Western Channel and canal tolls. Marianne's fingers closed around the brass tally hidden in her palm. The stamped heron suddenly had a name. This company already has wagons inside Ravensmere, she said. Fenwick saw them before the collapse. Crane did not glance at her. We anticipated that emergency supplies might be required. Before there was an emergency? Adrian took the contract. Marianne moved nearer and saw several ribbons attached to the final page. What security do they demand? Only the Whitcomb quarry and adjoining woodland if Ravensmere fails to repay the restoration costs within 90 days, Crane replied. Worthless ground in exchange for preserving the canal charter. The quarry is not worthless. Marianne remembered the chalk fragments in the diverted water and her uncle's warning that the western excavation had been abandoned before a complete mineral survey. You do not know what lies beneath it. Celeste gave a soft, weary sigh. Now she would have us believe an exhausted quarry is a treasure, merely because it supports her latest conspiracy. Give me 1 day, Marianne said. Let me examine the original boring records and trace the heron tally. If I am wrong, I will go to Northmere without another objection. Adrian's hand paused above the contract. It was the moment she had offered him in the hall, now stripped of witnesses who might mistake hesitation for weakness. He could delay. He could investigate. He could protect his tenants without trusting his wife. Instead, he looked at the 6 guards, the flooded road, and the woman whose family name still summoned the image of his brother's broken body. He took Crane's pen. Ravensmere cannot afford a day, Adrian signed. Crane pressed his signet beneath the ducal signature, and Celeste witnessed the transfer. With 3 strokes of ink, the Heron Navigation Company gained control of the Western Channel, its toll receipts, and every road leading to Whitcomb Quarry. Fenwick will remain in estate custody until the inquiry, Adrian continued. Marianne will proceed to Northmere tonight. Reverend Hart may visit, but no letters will leave without examination. You are silencing the witness and isolating the accused, Hart said. I am preventing interference. Marianne looked at the man she had married, and finally stopped measuring him against the husband he might have been. You have not prevented the scheme, Adrian. You have signed your name beneath it. Crane ordered the guards forward. Fenwick resisted when they seized him, and one struck his injured shoulder. Marianne stepped between them, taking the second blow across her back. I will go quietly if he travels in the carriage with Reverend Hart. Agreed, Adrian said, but he could not meet her eyes. The guards escorted them toward the waiting carriage. As Marianne climbed inside, the brass tally caught against the torn lining of her glove. One of its 2 notches broke free, revealing that the edge was not solid. A thin strip of rolled paper had been concealed inside a narrow channel, drilled through the brass. She waited until the carriage began moving, before drawing it out with Fenwick's pin. The paper contained 4 abbreviated entries: powder, West Vault, midnight, 12 charges. Marianne looked through the rear window. Beyond Whitcomb, lanterns were already moving toward the abandoned quarry. Adrian had not merely surrendered the canal to his enemies, he had given them legal authority to destroy the last structure holding the reservoir above 3 villages. Marianne spread the narrow strip of paper across Reverend Hart's prayer book. The West Vault is not a treasury chamber, she said. It is the oldest excavation beneath Whitcomb Quarry. Fenwick leaned closer, his face grey with pain. The tunnel sealed after Nathaniel's accident. Officially. She traced the route from memory against the leather cover. The vault runs beneath the chalk shelf, separating the quarry from the reservoir. 12 powder charges will collapse that shelf. The water will not flood the quarry gradually. It will tear through it, undermine the western embankment, and descend upon Ashcombe Vale. Reverend Hart looked toward the constable riding beside the carriage. We must return to his grace. There is no time, and Adrian has already given Heron Navigation lawful control of the roads. Crane will show the guards his contract and call us hysterical. Marianne tapped the word midnight. We have less than 2 hours. We save the villages first. Adrian and his charter must wait. Fenwick stared at her. Ashcombe Vale includes your father's old land. It includes 800 people who had no part in what either family did. Marianne knocked sharply against the roof and ordered the coachman to turn towards St. Jude's Chapel, whose bell could be heard across all 3 valleys. The constable blocked the road with his horse. His Grace commanded that you proceed to Northmere. Reverend Hart opened the carriage door and descended into the rain. And I command you, as rector of this parish, to decide whether obedience is worth the lives of children. The constable hesitated. Marianne held up the hidden message. Ride to Whitcomb Quarry if you doubt us. Look for powder carts near the West Vault, but send your partner to Ravensmere Hall with this warning. The younger officer took the paper. His superior reached for it, but Fenwick thrust his boot against the carriage door and knocked the man backward into the mud. The coachman whipped the horses forward. They reached St. Jude's with barely an hour remaining. Marianne climbed the narrow bell tower despite the agony in her shoulder and pulled the alarm rope until the great bronze bell thundered across the valley. 3 rapid strokes, a pause, then 3 more, the ancient warning for a failed reservoir. Lights appeared in distant cottages. Families emerged into the rain, some leading livestock, others carrying infants and blankets toward the ridge road. Reverend Hart rode south to Ashcombe Vale, while Fenwick directed the Whitcomb tenants uphill. Marianne remained at the chapel crossroads, refusing to leave until the last farm wagon had passed. At Ravensmere Hall, Adrian received the warning 20 minutes before midnight. He ordered Crane's men removed from the quarry, but the captain of the Heron Guards calmly presented the signed contract. Your Grace granted our company exclusive authority over all Western works. I revoke it. The agreement contains no provision for revocation during the 90-day restoration period. Adrian snatched the paper and found the clause buried beneath a folded schedule he had not examined. Crane had also used the contract to assign the canal's toll receipts directly to Heron Navigation as security. Adrian could command his household servants, but the armed laborers occupying his roads now answered to a company whose authority bore his own signature. He called for Crane and learned that the steward had left Ravensmere with Celeste an hour earlier. Only then did Adrian break Fenwick's seal. The foreman's statement described 2 different orders: Crane's wagon at the retaining wall, and a crate stamped with a heron delivered 3 days before 6 men died. Adrian read it twice. He had been holding the opportunity to stop the scheme when he chose to sign it instead. He mounted his horse and rode for the quarry with every loyal man he could gather. Midnight arrived before he crossed Crown Wood. The first explosion lifted the western ridge in a burst of orange flame. A concussion rolled across the valley, followed by a sound like stone grinding through the bones of the earth. Marianne felt the chapel steps move beneath her feet. In the distance, the quarry face folded inward. Reservoir water struck the collapsed shelf and erupted through the old tunnel, carrying timber, chalk, and abandoned mining equipment into Whitcomb. The diversion ditch Marianne had reopened caught the first surge and turned part of it away from the cottages, but the volume was too great. The canal towpath vanished. Ravensmere's principal grain mill broke from its foundations and rotated slowly in the black water before shattering against the lock bridge. The toll house followed, taking 6 months of uncollected cargo records with it. By the time Adrian reached the lower road, the bridge bearing his family crest had collapsed, leaving him stranded on the opposite bank from his own tenants. He shouted orders across the flood, but no one could hear him above the water. Marianne could. She stood on the chapel ridge, soaked and shivering, watching the material consequence of his signature rush through the estate. The mill, the toll house, the bridge, and perhaps the canal charter were lost, but the village lanterns continued moving safely toward higher ground. She had not preserved his wealth. She had preserved the people he had placed in danger. Josiah Reed approached with a mud-covered boy carrying a wooden powder crate lid recovered near the reopened ditch. A heron had been burned into the timber. Beneath it appeared a second mark, a crown above the letter N. Fenwick touched the symbol and went pale. That was Lord Nathaniel's private mark. Before Marianne could answer, the constable returned from the quarry with blood on his coat. The west vault was only the first target, he said. I found 6 charges still missing. Crane's men are taking them toward the eastern dam. Marianne looked east, where the reservoir's main embankment towered above Ashcombe Vale. Dawn would bring the highest pressure as water from the northern hills reached Blackwater. If the remaining charges were placed before then, no drainage channel could save the valley. They had 4 hours to discover where Tobias Crane intended to strike. By noon, Celeste had converted the disaster into an accusation. Printed notices appeared in Belchester claiming that Marianne Ashcombe had diverted Blackwater Reservoir to destroy evidence of her family's conspiracy against Ravensmere. The notices named her father as the secret owner of Heron Navigation and described Fenwick, Reverend Hart, and the Whitcomb villagers as accomplices bribed through the widow's fund. When Marianne returned to Ravensmere Hall, she found the county magistrates assembled beneath the same estate banner that still carried 6 black ribbons. Celeste stood at the trustees' table with the blue survey ledger open before her. Tobias Crane was absent, but his sworn declaration lay beside it. Magistrate Ellison lifted 2 pages covered in Marianne's handwriting. These calculations described the precise volume required to collapse the western chalk shelf. They describe how much water that shelf could withstand. Marianne replied, I prepared them to prevent a collapse. Celeste touched the ledger's torn binding. Conveniently, the accompanying explanation has been removed. Marianne examined the pages from a distance. They had been cut from the middle of her survey and repositioned beside a newly written heading, Western Diversion Contingency. The imitation of her hand was good enough to deceive a stranger. Allow me to inspect the ink and paper. You have already handled enough evidence, Ellison said. Celeste then produced the brass heron tally. This was recovered from the Duchess's belongings. It proves her connection to the company she now accuses. Reverend Hart stepped forward. That object was found beneath the collapsed braces, given to Her Grace by Thomas Fenwick, and sealed by me for delivery to this court. Armed men stole it at Belchester Ford. Can you prove it is the same tally? Celeste asked. Hart could not. The parish wine box and its wax seal had disappeared with the dispatch case. Celeste placed the tally beside Crane's declaration and continued. The Duchess's father arranged Lord Nathaniel's death after he discovered the Ashcombe interest in Whitcombe Quarry. Marianne married His Grace to conceal the crime, gained control of the canal, and destroyed the reservoir when exposure became inevitable. The narrative was false, but it joined every visible fact into a shape the room could understand. The old family feud, Nathaniel's death, Marianne's maps, the diverted water, and Adrian's public mistrust of his wife. Celeste had used Adrian's own accusations as the foundation. Magistrate Ellison ordered Marianne's accounts frozen and declared that she would remain confined at Ravensmere until the assizes. 2 constables moved toward her. Adrian stepped between them. Before you touch the Duchess, you will hear the part of this affair that bears my name. Celeste's composure shifted. Adrian, this is neither the time nor the place. That sentence has excused enough cowardice. He faced the trustees and tenants filling the gallery. I accused my wife before examining the surviving foreman. I refused an inspection of the forged seal. I transferred control of the canal to Lady Celeste and Tobias Crane, despite evidence that heron wagons had entered Ravensmere before the collapse. The contract that enabled the destruction of the Western Works bears my signature. A shocked murmur rose. Adrian removed the ducal signet from his finger and placed it on the table. I also acknowledge that Ravensmere failed to declare the mineral survey conducted by my brother beneath Whitcombe. Until the Crown determines whether unpaid royalties are owed, I relinquish my position as County Canal Commissioner. The admission cost him political office and exposed the estate to an inquiry that could claim years of revenue. Celeste stared at him with open fury. You would ruin your own house for a woman who despises you? No. I am naming what I did because it is true. Whether Marianne ever forgives me is not part of the bargain. He turned toward Magistrate Ellison. The unentailed lands at Northmere will be pledged to rebuild the tenants' homes and restore the pension fund. No creditor created by my contract will touch either. Marianne felt the weight of his words, but she did not mistake restitution for redemption. Adrian had finally chosen truth when it wounded him, yet he could not return the 6 dead men, restore her public honor, or erase the moment he had preferred revenge to evidence. Ellison conferred with the other magistrates. His Grace's confession establishes negligence, not Lady Marianne's innocence. She will remain under guarded residence until the documents can be examined. Celeste had appeared to win. Fenwick was discredited as a paid conspirator. Elias Ward had vanished from the chapel infirmary. The cargo manifests had been stolen, and Crane's men had burned the abandoned powder wagon before dawn. Marianne was escorted to her former chamber, where the lock was once again turned from the outside. The room had been searched. Her correspondence, engineering instruments, and private account books were gone. Only the damaged brass compass remained beneath the dressing table, apparently dismissed as worthless. Marianne retrieved it and noticed something caught inside the torn lining of her glove, a curved fragment of brass from the tally's broken notch. She placed it against the memory of the tally Celeste had displayed. The edges would fit exactly. More importantly, Celeste had presented the tally with its hollow channel facing downward, concealing the opening where the message had been removed. She knew the tally contained a secret compartment. No innocent investigator could have known that, merely by looking at it. Reverend Hart had read the concealed message before sealing the object, and Josiah Reed had witnessed its recovery before Marianne ever touched it. Celeste would now need to explain both her possession of the stolen tally and her knowledge of what had been hidden inside. Marianne opened her compass. The needle still responded to the iron residue embedded in the forged order's wax, and the silversmith Adrian had summoned was waiting in Belchester. One stolen object, one counterfeit seal, and one carefully framed question could force Celeste to lie under oath. Marianne sat at the writing desk and began designing the public trap. Reverend Hart entered Marianne's locked chamber shortly before dawn, carrying a prayer book, and left 20 minutes later with her instructions hidden beneath the Book of Judgment. By sunrise, Josiah Reed had moved Fenwick to a tenant cottage beyond Heron's Roads. The Belchester silversmith had placed his order book in the parish strongbox, and 2 constables loyal to Magistrate Ellison were searching the abandoned lime kiln for Elias Ward. Marianne insisted that no witness travel alone and that every object be listed, wrapped and sealed before the inquiry. Celeste had already stolen 1 chain of proof. She would not be offered another. At 10 o'clock, the county inquiry reconvened in the parish assembly hall because flood damage had made Ravensmere's Great Hall unsafe. Magistrates occupied the raised platform, tenants filled the benches, and representatives of the Canal Commission stood along the walls. Marianne entered under guard without jewels, household keys, or ducal privilege. Adrian waited near the trustees' table, but she did not take the empty chair beside him. She stood with Reverend Hart and the Whitcomb families. Celeste attacked first. The evidence will show that Marianne Ashcombe used her position as Duchess to continue her father's campaign against Ravensmere, she declared. She falsified surveys, manipulated the widow's fund to purchase loyalty, and directed explosives toward the reservoir after her sabotage of the retaining wall was discovered. Tobias Crane had still not appeared, but Celeste read his sworn declaration aloud. It claimed Marianne had secretly hired Heron Navigation, supplied the company with estate maps, and placed the brass tally beneath the collapsed braces to implicate innocent contractors. Why would she implicate a company she secretly employed? Magistrate Ellison asked. Celeste hesitated only briefly. To make Crane appear responsible if her scheme failed. And when did you first see the tally? Marianne asked. Ellison frowned. You will have an opportunity to respond. Her answer determines whether the evidence before you was stolen. Celeste faced her. I first saw it yesterday, when it was recovered among your possessions. You had never examined it at Ravensmere, Whitcomb, or Belchester Ford. Never. Does it contain any unusual feature? Celeste gave a dismissive glance toward the object on the table. It is an ordinary brass token, bearing a heron. Its significance exists only in your imagination. Marianne requested permission to approach. Ellison granted it. She removed the curved fragment from her glove and placed it against the broken notch in the tally. The edges joined so precisely that the fracture became nearly invisible. A murmur spread through the hall. This fragment broke away while the tally was in my possession after the public accusation, Marianne said. Thomas Fenwick found the token beneath the retaining braces. Josiah Reed saw it in my hand at Whitcomb. Reverend Hart sealed it, and 2 constables guarded it until Celeste's men attacked their carriage. Each witness rose in turn and confirmed the chain. That proves you possessed it, Celeste said. Not that I stole it. No, your own answer proves that. Marianne rotated the tally and inserted Fenwick's narrow pin into the exposed hole beneath the restored notch. A hidden brass sleeve slid from its edge. Celeste's face lost a shade of color. You positioned the tally with that opening against the table and claimed it had no unusual feature. Yet someone removed the message concealed inside it after Reverend Hart sealed it. If you first saw the tally yesterday, how did you know which side must remain hidden? I positioned nothing deliberately. Then repeat that under oath. Celeste looked toward Ellison. The magistrate ordered the clerk to record her answer. I had no knowledge of any compartment. Reverend Hart opened his prayer book and produced the transcription he had made before sealing the tally. Powder, West Vault, midnight, 12 charges. Fenwick testified that the token had been beneath the braces before Marianne entered the ruined worksite. Reed confirmed that Marianne had dropped it while saving his village, long before Heron's existence was known to her. The constables described the Belchester ambush and identified one captured attacker as a Heron employee. Marianne then opened her damaged compass beside the original accusation. Its needle swung toward the red wax. The ducal matrix is silver, she said. This wax contains iron residue because the seal was pressed with a counterfeit steel die. Mr. Silas Mercer, the Belchester silversmith, stepped forward. He scraped a minute sample onto white porcelain, drew it with a magnet, and examined the impression through a lens. The wax contains steel filings. The impression also bears a crescent-shaped defect at the lower edge. His Grace's genuine matrix has no such flaw. Adrian removed his signet ring and allowed Mercer to compare its crest with the document. This order was not sealed by me, Adrian stated. I nevertheless treated it as genuine, denied my wife an examination, and transferred authority to Crane and Lady Celeste. Those were my choices. He authenticated his signature on the Heron contract and confirmed that Celeste had entered his private study, controlled Nathaniel's effects, and possessed the survey room keys before the reservoir was destroyed. He did not interpret the evidence for Marianne or ask the room to forgive him. He merely exposed every door he had opened. Fenwick then compared his copied work order with the accusation. One carried Adrian's forged signature and commanded the fatal removal of the braces. The other carried Marianne's forged initials and converted the crime into a case against her. The first order created 6 deaths, Marianne said. The second ensured that the person best able to identify the altered water flow would be confined. Crane supplied the labor and controlled the canal. Celeste supplied access to Nathaniel's wagons, Adrian's correspondence, my survey room, and the ducal seal. You still cannot connect me to the counterfeit matrix, Celeste said. Nor can you prove the quarry belonged to Heron before Adrian signed the contract. That is true, Marianne replied, which is why I asked Mr. Mercer to bring the commission book from his workshop. The silversmith placed a heavy volume before the magistrates. He explained that every seal matrix required a written design, the purchaser's name, and the signature of the person collecting it. 6 months earlier, someone had commissioned a steel copy of the Ravensmere crest and demanded that it retain one deliberate crescent defect so it could be distinguished from the original. Mercer opened the book to the marked entry. The signature had been partially cut away during the Belchester ambush, but the collector had pressed a personal seal into the margin. Marianne looked at the tiny surviving impression, then at the ring Celeste was unconsciously twisting on her finger. Remove Lady Celeste's ring, she told the magistrate, and place it beside the commission mark. Ellison summoned the clerk. The entire hall fell silent as he reached for Celeste's hand. The clerk removed Celeste's ring and pressed its face into softened wax beside the surviving mark in Mercer's commission book. The 2 impressions matched perfectly. A heron, with one raised wing, enclosed by a circle of 12 dots. Celeste's composure broke. She lunged for the volume, but the constables seized her before she reached it. A copied seal proves nothing, she cried. Crane arranged the work. I merely collected a package for him. Then you admit collecting the counterfeit matrix, Marianne said. Celeste realized too late that she had contradicted her sworn denial. Magistrate Ellison ordered her statement recorded. At that moment, Josiah Reed entered with Elias Ward between 2 constables. The young carter's face was bruised, but he walked unaided. He had escaped through a drainage opening in the lime kiln, where Crane's men imprisoned him, then led the officers to a locked chamber containing Nathaniel's missing survey chest. Inside were ore samples from Whitcomb, copies of secret heron shipments, the genuine Ravensmere matrix, and Nathaniel's unfinished report accusing Tobias Crane of stealing silver-bearing stone from beneath the ducal estate. Elias identified Celeste as the woman who had paid him to drive an Ashcombe carriage to the Western Bridge 3 years earlier. Crane had ordered him to leave it where it would be discovered after Nathaniel's fall. Lord Nathaniel was alive when we arrived, Elias said. He was arguing with Mr. Crane beside the broken railing. Lady Celeste demanded the survey report. When his lordship refused, Crane struck him and pushed him against the rail. It gave way because the bolts had already been removed. Celeste had not intended to marry Nathaniel. She had used his affection to gain access to Whitcomb, believing the hidden ore would make her independently wealthy. When Nathaniel discovered the theft, she and Crane killed him, planted the Ashcombe carriage, and allowed Adrian's grief to complete their deception. Marianne's marriage gave them a second opportunity. They fed Adrian's resentment, copied his seal, sabotaged the retaining wall, and created a false order bearing Marianne's initials. Once Adrian publicly removed his wife, Celeste gained the keys, while Crane gained unrestricted control of the canal. The reservoir disaster destroyed shipment records, concealed the illegal excavation, and forced Adrian to sign Whitcomb Quarry over to Heron navigation. Their plan had nearly succeeded because Adrian had repeatedly chosen vengeance over examination. Crane was captured that afternoon while attempting to cross into Wales with company bonds and stolen ore concealed beneath his carriage. He and Celeste were committed for trial on charges of conspiracy, forgery, theft, sabotage, and responsibility for Nathaniel's death and the 6 canal workers killed by their false order. Heron Navigation's assets were seized pending judgment. The captured funds were assigned first to the dead laborers' families and the rebuilding of the flooded villages. Yet their guilt did not erase Adrian's. Before the same tenants who had watched him strip Marianne of her keys, he publicly withdrew every accusation against her. My wife warned me that the seal was false, that Fenwick must be heard, and that Heron had entered Ravensmere before the collapse, he said. I refused each warning. I confined her, surrendered her work to another woman, and signed the authority that destroyed the canal. Lady Celeste deceived me, but she did not command my cruelty. That belongs to me. Adrian resigned permanently as County Canal Commissioner. He surrendered Northmere and his unentailed western lands to an independent trust administered for Marianne's separate use, subject to legal instruments prepared by her solicitor. The widow's pension fund was restored from his personal fortune, and every family displaced by the flood received new farmland or compensation. His creditors took the London house and most of his unentailed investments. Ravensmere survived, but Adrian's political ambitions, financial freedom, and marriage did not. Marianne's reputation was formally restored by the county magistrates and the Canal Commission. She was appointed director of the Blackwater Reconstruction Trust, with authority over its engineers, accounts, and flood defences. When Adrian asked what terms would permit her return as his wife, she met him in the repaired parish hall, the place where she had exposed Celeste rather than the hall where he had condemned her. There are no terms for returning, she said. You believed I was your enemy because hatred required less courage than truth. When I offered you evidence, you chose punishment. When I offered you one day, you signed away the safety of thousands. I will not spend the remainder of my life waiting to discover whether your next grief makes me guilty again. Adrian lowered his head. He did not plead, touch her, or offer remorse as a bargain. Through their solicitors, they established a legal separation with generous separate maintenance, independent residence, and complete control of Marianne's professional earnings. Adrian agreed never to obstruct her work or use his title to summon her back. 6 months later, the rebuilt western lock opened beneath a clear spring sky. Tenants gathered along the new stone channel as water passed safely through gates designed by Marianne. Mrs. Harrow's sons raised the signal flag, while Fenwick, his arm healed, supervised the first grain barge. Adrian watched from the opposite bank in a plain dark coat, standing among the landowners rather than above them. He had funded the bridge and surrendered every claim to name it. Marianne carried the silver ring of canal keys at her waist. At the center of the bridge, Adrian stepped aside to let her pass. "The canal is yours," he said. "No," Marianne answered, looking toward the families waiting downstream. "It belongs to the people who depend upon it." She removed the western gate key, locked the control housing beneath her own authority, and continued across the bridge without looking back.